Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live. Happy Pride Month. I am joined today by a very special guest. Um, I'm just waiting for her to send me a request. Gina, if you are in there. Oh, there she is. Perfect. Waiting for Gina to get here. I hope everyone is well. Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay,
How are
awesome.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? I'm so
I'm
excited.
fantastic. I'm so excited too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just trying to pin this comment. This always happens. And then
Yes,
we
I
can
know.
and then we
He's
can talk
always trying to
about,
get close to the image.
yes, there's always something. You look amazing, first of all. Let's just start there. You look fantastic. I spoke to you yesterday over the phone, but we didn't have a video call, so I've seen photos, but you look lovely in person.
It's a little something, something, I'm getting ready to speak with the queen. So,
Oh,
yes, of course.
stop. Oh, but you're a former queen yourself, so being in the beauty pageant space before going on to do everything else. But before we start, Gina, I want to wish you a very happy Pride Month. And, I know a lot of people have had so many questions of what Pride is because there's a lot of people who still don't know what that is. Would you please explain to us what Pride is? I know that there's so much rich history behind it.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you. Again, thank you for having me. Thank you for creating this space and to have this conversation. Certainly, Pride is historically it's a month of Pride celebration. But then I think what's really important is to always understand the historical context of what Pride is, right? I mean, and it's complicated. I mean, Pride is a history technically itself started in 1969 during the last weekend of June. Pride is a riot. Started as a Stonewall riot, right? It's like multi-day riot of uprising where LGBTQ people got fed up with how they're being policed, how they're being dehumanized. So that really how Pride started in New York City, right? And from that moment on, that led to some people would say as the modern civil rights movement for LGBTQ people. So it started from there and certainly has such a major effect throughout the whole world and what that meant, both from, people from all over the world rising up and going on the streets and making sure that, our collective voices are heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember on the 1st of June when we entered into this month, I tweeted earlier on because I wanted to say Happy Pride Month, but I also said that I hope that we remember as we continue to fight for human rights, that we remember the rights of, other people as well, the LGBTQ community, and the human rights that they're constantly, fighting every day, because that's what Pride is. So thank you so much for being my first guest in this Pride Month. I know you and I share so many things in common. Like I said, you are a pageant queen at heart. I know that you're so passionate about gender stereotypes, about representation, and it's what you're about. Why is representation so important to you, and why do you feel the need for it, especially in the LGBTQ community and the trans community for women and men?
Yeah, I mean, representation is so important. I mean, it's also a complicated thing for me. I was born and raised in the Philippines, right? I've lived half of my life in the Philippines. I lived half of my life in United States, and certainly when people ask me what that representation means, it's a complicated thing, right? Because growing up in the Philippines, we've always been exposed to beauty pageant, particularly transgender beauty pageant. It's part of
Yes.
our culture. It exists from little villages in the mountain to the national television, and I've joined it all.
You've done all of it.
I've done all of it. And when I was 15 years old, I was mentored by this trans woman named Tiger Lily, which became my trans mother. And from that moment on, stepping on that stage was like my first early sort of moment of claiming my space, claiming my representation of all the women, the trans women who came before me, when I saw them joining trans pageant when I was growing up. So in a way, I was so lucky to have had that, like a technical visibility of like, I wanted to be like them. But then when I moved to the US, it was a little bit complicated, It's different. Obviously, it's a very different culture, different political reality.
Absolutely.
And I always like to say that when, growing up in the Philippines, being trans, and still is the reality right now, being trans in the Philippines is culturally visible but not politically recognized. We're visible. We're part of the society. You see us in mainstream culture. We see us, every day. But there's no political recognition, meaning there are no rights for trans people to recognize who we are. There are no anti-discrimination policies, right? But then when I moved to United States, in California specifically, it was the other way around, right? There was a degree of political recognition. I could, be the woman that I am. I have access to certain rights from healthcare. I was recognized as a woman, right? But there was no transgender beauty pageant in the national television. That was my first question, because I wanted to continue that life. So that presented a different layer of complexity when it comes to visibility and representation. And I think, that impacted a lot of the way I viewed myself when I moved as an immigrant, when I moved to the US, and certainly when I first started modeling in New York City. Being an out and proud transgender woman was not allowed. So in a way, I was out and proud at such a young age, and then I had to go back to the closet, for about 8 years, and I had to come out again. So it's complicated.
Oh, absolutely. But I can say, just by being who you are and doing the things that you continue to do, you are changing, the perceptions of people each and every day. And you are inspiring so many more young people and even old people who are still trying to find themselves in that space of being comfortable in their identity and not being scared into stepping into their full selves. So I think just your existence is doing so much for that community. You spoke about coming out, and I know you did something so big when you stepped onto the TED Talk. How was that for you? Why did you take that decision to go onto TED Talk, one of the biggest platforms in the world for people to come and speak? And you shared your story and you shared your truth with us. And I remember watching it and feeling so touched by it, the things that you said, the things that you stood for and are representing. What pushed you to do that? Why did you feel it was important to take that platform?
Yeah, TED, it's literally changed my life, and as I said before, being a fashion model in New York City, yes, I was a working fashion model, like working in magazines, doing commercials and all that stuff. But then I like to always say that, because you always look at it in the context, this is in 2005 in New York City, again, being an out and proud trans person in fashion industry was not allowed. So in a way, I was in this industry of fashion and advertising where it's all about this power of visibility and imagery. But then I was in, of magazines, covers of magazines, but I was not really being seen as the woman that I am, so that kind of affected the way I viewed myself, and in a way also affected such an emotional turmoil, because I couldn't really fully be myself. I wasn't out to my model agent. I was only out to like a certain close-knit, protected support system. And that affected me. And then when I turned 30 years old, I realized that, I'm entering into this new phase of my life. What does it mean? And I guess I was ready. I was ready to share my story to the world on my 30th birthday. And I was just like, it's go big or go home, and I realized, go big or go home and do it in the biggest, as what you said, it's in the biggest platform that you could think of. There's nothing more, at least, when I decided at the time to really share it on that big stage, right, and tell my story. And that was my very first public speaking. And it was, looking back, it was mad to think.
Wow, I'm surprised, because I could have never said you felt so comfortable on the stage. I think it's the beauty pageant training again, I guess, that gave you so much confidence to be comfortable on that stage, because I would have never said that was your first public speaking.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Wow.
I mean, it's what you said there. It's right. I mean, like again, I owe so much to my trans mother, Tiger Lily. I think she might be watching. I know it's 2 a.m. in the Philippines, so she might be watching. Hi, trans mother, Tiger Lily, if you're watching,
I
I
hope
love
she
you.
is.
I think she's watching. To all my friends in the Philippines, the Garcia trans sisters, to all the people in Mandaluyong, I owe it to them. You know, when I stood in that stage, even though it was my very first public speaking, it was all that muscle memory of being on stage and answering the question, you know, claiming your space and speaking your truth and speaking with passion. You know, all those things that she taught me and that was I was trained to do came back, you know, in this moment of, you know, you're in, and that was like I was in a stage with like 2,000 people in front of me, 2,000 people in front of the most powerful people, right? People like who are CEOs of Google, to ambassadors, to presidents, to scientists, to Nobel Lord, you know, prize winners, right?
And you were in there with them.
And you were I was there, right? And to being listened to as a human being, as a person, just purely telling my story. You know, I'm not there to, you know, to affect people, like please, you know, believe what I'm saying. Like this is just me speaking my truth, you know. And in a way, you know, it really changed my life. And that moment, you know, it had affected the way the work that I was able to do, to travel the world, and in a way, you know, go back to the community in where I started.
Absolutely. You said something about human beings as you just spoke, and I think that's something that we forget when we look at, you know, trans women and men and the whole LGBTQ community. We forget the humanity of it. We forget that they are human and they share the same rights that we do. I mean, we see this every day. Just about 2-3 days ago, we saw a video of a young trans woman who was being battered and bitten by probably more than 30 people, both men and women, who were just like kicking her down and beating her up. And for me, it just says so much about where we are and how we are not considerate about, you know, other human beings. And I saw you shared that as well, because I'm sure it's something that's very close to your heart to see, you know, people of your own being treated that way by people just because of their sexuality and how they choose to identify. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have. And we're not having enough of that conversation, because when we speak of human rights, we don't speak of gay rights, we don't speak of trans women and men rights, we don't speak about that enough. And I think we should be using those platforms, especially this month, to highlight those issues and to say this is actually wrong. This is not how you're supposed to be treating other people just because they choose to identify differently than you do. What was your headspace when you saw that? Because I know you shared it as well.
Yeah, it gave me goosebumps, you just speaking about it. It is it's difficult, you know, and thank you for saying that. And it's traumatizing, you know, to see that, because I know I recognize my degree of privilege to have the family that have loved me and supported me, just like what I mentioned to the trans community that have loved me in the Philippines, right? So I was given that support. Yes, I've experienced different levels of transphobia and different levels of abuse, right, growing up in the Philippines. But, you know, seeing that image within, you know, in the context of what's happening right now, it's really traumatizing. It's unfortunately, this is the reality of a lot of trans people. There's fortunately there's always this story that I hear from my community of violence, of dehumanization, right, when it comes to just us existing as we are. Because obviously there's still a lot of things that people don't understand about trans people, but especially the moment we speak our truth, listen to us, right? This is who we are. And don't debate us about our humanity, you know, because for so long, trans people, you know, the idea and the understanding of trans people, you know, within the mainstream cultural context is always predicated on the idea that we're not the person that we are. You know, I say that I am a woman of trans experience. This is who I am, you know, and I'm not speaking. Yeah, and I'm not speaking as this separate human being to be considered, oh, that's a separate human being. Transgender, that's an adjective, you know, that's not a noun. You know, we're talking about someone's lived experience. So claiming that space and be in sharing, who you are is so powerful. And seeing that, I mean, like I personally didn't want to share the video itself because it's really traumatizing, and obviously there's a much bigger conversations within the community, and just like what you said, there should be more conversation around that. When we talk about the lives of trans people, and even me speaking with you, or like some of the things that have happened in pop culture when it comes to visibility of trans people, people might think, but because now we're in covers of magazines, we are producers, we are, in political positions of power, right? And we have a voice. There's another side of visibility, which is violence and sometimes death, right? In the last few years, there's more death and killings of trans people, particularly Black trans women in the United States and all over the world, because people, and in a way, people have said it's a backlash of the reality of trans people. So there's another side of progress when it comes to visibility, right? Which is, and usually what happens is like, marginalized Black trans women, are the most affected in the community. So, as I mentioned, seeing that video is very difficult. It's very traumatizing, and I always want to just ground myself when I'm talking about that story. And obviously, it's an important conversation to be had. But there's another side of that, which is the unfortunate, tragic reality of what's happening right now on the ground. That's why we need to always center the most marginalized in our communities, particularly, when it comes to feminism and sisterhood, right? Our Black trans sisters.
It really is very heavy, but I think one of the other things that you mentioned, especially when I was watching your TED talk, was that you had the support of your mother since you were a young child, since you identified as who you identified as. She was always there. And I know it's such a huge issue when it comes to young children who start recognizing themselves and need the push and all the help that they can get. I mean, we saw it in current events where Gabrielle Union's trans daughter, who's trying to transition and find herself in that space, Zaya Wade, when she took that decision of wanting to identify as who she is, there was a lot of backlash that came in, especially towards her parents, because they said, how could they allow something like this to happen to a young child? What is your opinion on that, about parents being there and about people in general having to educate themselves, about this, and understanding that children at a very young age sometimes make that decision and feel the need to be there? And obviously we don't want to disregard people's opinions in the way, because sure, everyone has their opinion and we can't take that away from them. But what do you have to say for that parent and children relationship?
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack there, right? I mean, I always first situate that from my personal experience, I knew when I was 5 years old, that I'm a girl. I actually have a moment where I would always wear a t-shirt on my head or a blanket, or sometimes if I wanted a long hair, I would wear a long blanket or towel. And then I remember I got to the point where my mom asked me, how come I always wear that t-shirt on my head? And I told my mom, I'm a girl. I knew deep inside at such a young age, and research, science backed this up, that like young trans kids know who they are, and we just need to support them and listen to them more. But I understand the context when people are not familiar or does not have all the information that they have. For so long we've been led to believe that gender is just this very rigid binary, that when the baby is born, the doctor assigned a baby, whether you're male or female, because of a particular body part, like we're defined by that. But that's not the case, right? I mean, science again backs this up. It's more complicated when it comes to biology. So as a culture, for so long, we've been led to believe that we need to always put people in a box, right? So I understand what people are going through, but in this moment in time where you have Google, you have YouTube, you have Netflix, you have all these information, available to everybody. Absolutely. To be ignorant about these things is a choice, now in a
Yeah.
sense, you know. There's so much information that's out there, but also I also am recognizing it, you know, that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I have to also say that, you know, as I mentioned, my mom, who had loved me and supported me since I was a young trans girl at feminine expression, you know, my family, I grew up in a very conservative Catholic culture, you know, where, you know, yes, we have a trans pageant, but, you know, we also have a conservative Catholic culture. And sometimes I ask my mom, where did you find in yourself to love me and support me? And my mom just always say, she just accepted me and loved me. And I even shared this experience where when I was growing up, I used to play with my sister's Barbie. I actually stole my sister's Barbie. And that's a toy that makes me so happy. And every time they would take away, they would always say, every time we take away your Barbie from you, you cried so loud and we can't continue watching our telenovela or soap opera. So why would we want not interrupt our soap opera and then you not be happy with your thing? So we want you to be happy. So
have this doll. I love it so much.
yeah, so my Barbie doll saved me. So, you know. So yeah, I mean, like, I understand that. And I also have to say to Gabrielle, obviously there's such power in celebrities or people with influence and visibility that are standing up and using their platform to speak about these issues. And, you know, she's been at the forefront of this, you know, in speaking out on these matters. And just the love that she expressed to Zaya is so powerful and life-changing. And, you know, it's powerful. And I know she's been doing a lot of work supporting other initiatives, you know, that concerns and that would uplift trans people and gender nonconforming people. So I really love you, Gabrielle. So
we
thank
love
you.
her. We love Gabrielle.
We love Gabrielle.
I mean, I had no choice but to stand her when that started coming out, because I mean, the protection of your children, first of all, and understanding who they are and listening to them is so important. You know, listening to children is so important because it's what sometimes drives them to getting anxieties and drives them to depression. And so to know that we have parents like your mother and Gabrielle's just as a partner to her husband as well, they're both doing this together and making sure that they fight, because usually you know, men will stay away from these types of discussions, but Dwayne has literally been at the forefront of it, fighting and making sure that he's putting his son's transition into wanting to identify as a girl.
I know. I've seen some of his videos actually. Yes, and that was so powerful. I mean, I think he went
very
in some
beautiful
major television shows and talk shows and speaking about that, and that's so powerful. And you know, it's been said that when a young trans person, especially trans kids, transition, the whole community transitions with them. You know, and some people might think that like it's such a big thing to do, but I think it's so empowering. You know, like the transition process within the community context is so powerful. And then when a young kid transitions, we're not talking about surgeries, we're not talking about medical intervention, we're just talking about the recognition of this young trans kid as the person they are, whether it's just wearing, you know, I don't know, a towel in my hair, just like when I was young, or playing with some lipsticks. It's just lipstick. It's just fabric. It's just clothes, you know? I mean, medical intervention doesn't happen much later on, but that's not the decision that happens at that early stage. It's just purely that recognition that we need to support young trans kids more and more, right? And because, and I think you were alluding to this fact a little bit earlier, that what happens is that the unfortunate reality of what happens to trans youth. I work a lot with trans youth. Obviously, the levels of resources now, it's much more available. That I know when I was growing up, it was not there, you know, whether access to therapy or support system, you know, safe spaces. You know, if there's no support for trans youth, it unfortunately leads to 1 in 3 trans youth, you know, attempting suicide. These are sobering realities why we need to be there for our trans youth.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned that there's resources. We spoke about them yesterday as well. I know that we're going to speak after this, where you can actually send me those resources so that we can share them
Sure.
you know, with our Miss Universe fans who would need that kind of information. I know you when we speak of gender fluidity, we think it's something that just that's just new, that's happening now. And I remember in our conversations, you said even pre colonization times, it was there, you know, it's been there. And I think that's something that people don't know about, but I guess the more you research about it, the more you understand that kind of space. Now,
Yeah.
something exciting, you
Yeah.
started the Gender Proud Productions.
Yes.
Why the decision to do that?
I mean, I have to say, you know, I have no background in producing when I first started that. You know, mentioned a little bit, after I did the TED Talk, I launched, an advocacy campaign. I was asked by, the UN, by President Obama's State Department to, global entities to travel the world and speak on these matters, right? And that's important, because putting telling my personal story and humanizing, the issue that most people did not understand, especially at the time in 2014, was something that was needed, right? And I was so lucky to have, been able to been invited in so many different spaces all over the world, to my Pacific Islander communities, to, going back to the Philippines, in the communities and where I started and where I grew up, all over the world, right? But then I would find myself in situations where I'm the only trans person in the room of big decision-making rooms, right? Which I'm sure you could relate in some aspects. And in a way, I am in those situations where I'm the only trans person in the room, and there's a lot of pressure that I'm not here to represent the whole trans community. I certainly cannot represent the whole community.
Yeah.
I'm speaking about a very particular experience, and to be put in a situation where you're asked to represent the whole community, especially in rooms where I would always hear statistics, about trans people, and, where, decisions about, where money will go for trans people, and I'm the only trans people in the room. I realized what was missing was the humanization of those stories and the complexities and the nuance, lived experience of trans people all over the world. So I told myself, what better way to do this than to create a production company and to tell stories, from the perspective of a transgender person, because in a way, modeling my career for like Tyra Banks, like from model to being in production, because the power in changing hearts and minds through storytelling, to movies, to TV shows, to web series, to short films, any form of art and storytelling from the perspective of that community, from the perspective of the marginalized communities, was so powerful. And that's what I wanted to do. And I have been so lucky, and I've been so fortunate to have been given such an opportunity. My very first project that I did was with Logo and MTV and VH1 about trans youth, called Beautiful as I Want to Be, which is, just like what we were talking about before, working with trans youth and asking them, what does beautiful as I want to be for you? And giving them that platform, giving them that space to share their dreams and their hopes. And in that process, we partnered them with a mentor, and to tell them, stories of, that the possibility in their dreams, right? Because for so long, trans youth did not have that image of a positive image in their lives. So we did that, and sometimes even working with, Fusion Channel, tackling the unemployment rate for trans people. Trans people, the unemployment rate is 3 times the national average. If you're a trans person of color, it's 4 times the national average. Imagine more right now in the reality of this pandemic, right? So we tackled the story of trans women of color and their unemployment and then their employment process from the perspective of trans people, right? And tackling and breaking down that narrative. And, stories of, even from my own community, from the fashion industry, right? I mean, I was, I know as a fashion model, I owe so much to the women who came before me, like women like Lauren Foster, Crimsona Kaser, Carolyn Cosi, Tracy Africa Norman. This, particularly, a lot of trans women in fashion industry that have led the way and made it possible for me. So we did this project with VH1 and MTV called Made to Model, where I put them together in a room, and some of these communities, these women have not even met in person. So to be able to give back in that sense, it was so powerful. It was so for me, it was revolutionary to have that space. So again, it's as a storyteller, as a producer, it's very important. Glad Media did the study that only 16% of Americans know a trans person, and usually, you know, the first interaction is with advertising and media. So it's important to have that dignified story.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, on that, speaking of coming before, you know, trans women who came before you, and speaking of, you know, leading a new path so that other people may follow, I think it's the most appropriate time to bring in Angela Ponce.
Yes, I love her. She's my sister. We love her.
At Miss Universe. I remember the moment when she came out and she had her country's flag, and she said, me just being here on this stage is enough. You know, she said she doesn't even have to win, but her being on that stage meant so much to her community, and for them to know that it is possible for them too. And I know that you met her personally even before the whole you know, her whole Miss Universe journey, and it was very special to me to see that kind of representation, to see that kind of change, and to know how open-minded, you know, MUO was about it. It was incredible, and I'm hoping that it's things that can continue to happen in the future, where we can expand and be a more acceptable society. So I think that was just beautiful. But you know her personally, so you met in, you said, was it?
Yeah, we met. Yeah, so I was so, first of all, I was so happy, obviously, when that happened to her. I mean, like, just like what you said, I'm giving me goosebumps again. Like, it's to watch that on being broadcast globally, her claiming her space of worth and beauty and power in that moment was so revolutionary. It was historic, but also historical, you know, because she represented this long history of, you know, trans people being part of, you know, the pageant culture, right? You know, a pageant culture in the Philippines that I grew up is just as valid as any mainstream, you know, pageant, right? So that was so powerful. So yeah, I was shooting a commercial in Madrid, Spain, and I remember posting about it, and some, you know, trans-led organizations reminded me that, you know, I could meet them, and I met some of them, and then one of the women that was running an organization told me about Angela Ponce, and then I believe we met the next day, and it was. And this is why I love when I travel around the world, is when I get to meet, you know, trans sisters, particularly trans people in general all over the world, where we get to sit down and share about our life story. And also, you know, I remember having brunch with her, starting early, and we spent about 6 hours in Madrid walking around. And yes, you know, there may be some language barrier, but we didn't need to speak the same actual language. You know, I could barely understand Spanish, but we didn't need to understand the same language. But the sisterhood was so powerful. We walked around Madrid. It was so beautiful. She was showing me, you know, her dance, and we even, it's almost like we were, you know, just looking at each other and just recognizing what we're going through. And we spent a beautiful day together. I posted a video about it, and we were just laughing. We were walking around Madrid, in the beautiful city of Madrid, and just the two of us was so there. And to her, obviously, to have that Miss Universe moment, as I mentioned, is very historical, you know, that's to have there, you know. And I mean, also I have to say, you know, growing up in the Philippines, again, you know, pageant being part of our culture, some have said it should be the national sport. And to have that historical context, you know, Angela Ponce being from Spain, I mean, let's talk about, you know, colonization here. Spain colonized the Philippines for about 400 years, and that Spain introduced this whole notion of gender binary and trans people in the Philippines. Before colonization, the babaylan have always existed. And obviously to have the impacts of colonization, and to obviously the realities of political recognitions for trans people in the Philippines, and to have Spain, the ones who colonized the Philippines, and to the first one to send a trans person in Miss Universe, is like this walking contradiction.
It's very
right.
interesting.
I mean, that's why I like to say that her moment is historic and also historical, you know, because we also need to acknowledge that before Angela Ponce, Jenna Talakova was joining Miss Universe Canada, was the first one to really brought this to light as well. yeah, but that have led the way in changing the policies for
Absolutely.
Miss
Absolutely.
Universe organization. So, I mean, kudos again to Miss Universe organization for leading the way. And, you know, I hope globally it should be trans people should be allowed to join the pageants in
Absolutely.
their respective
Should be
countries
allowed to do
because we are
anything
women.
and everything, because absolutely you are women. And it was just such a historical, beautiful moment. And there's another beautiful moment this year, the 2020 Stonewall Day. I know that you are the chair national this year, and could you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So last year, the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riot, right? So we did a big celebration. And I was, you know, I hosted the event in front of the Stonewall, at the Stonewall. So it was a big historical moment to celebrate that. And then this year, I was asked to be the national chair. This is before COVID pandemic happened. And certainly when that happened, we realized, what can we do? Certainly we can't do the concert that we did last year. So we realized what better way to do this than to do a 90-minute live stream fundraising. There will be a lot of VIPs that will be there, people in the community, advocates, allies in the community. So it's a 90-minute live stream event in partnership with Pride Media and Warner Media to fundraise for the most marginalized in our community and to give funds for, you know, trans, person of color led organizations. So we're identifying a lot of that. So yeah, on June 26th, that will happen and it will be exciting. And so I'm honored to be asked to be the national chair. So it's very exciting.
Oh man, I absolutely love that. Okay, I want to see if I can take 2 questions because I feel like we have been talking for a while, and I just want to see if anyone has questions for you. I think we'll take 2, 3, and then we'll wrap it up, unfortunately, because you know, Instagram times us. So
I know. It's always getting caught in that moment.
Yeah, here's a good one. Meg is asking, how can cisgendered people be good allies to the transgender community?
Yeah, and I love that question.
Yeah, it's a really
I like
good
being
one.
asked that question
Actually,
because
let me put it up here while you answer so that people can see it. There it is. Okay.
how can cisgender people be good allies to the transgender community? For people who don't know the word, cisgender is basically non-trans people, right? When you're, you know, assigned a certain gender at birth, you identify as the same. So let me just clarify that. So the word ally is a complicated thing for me. People would say I'm an ally and they get to declare to the trans community. I like to always say that being an ally is not a noun, it's a verb, right? It's about your action that you're doing. It's also about, you know, you don't get to declare that you're the ally of the trans community. And it applies to everything, right? The marginalized community gets to say that you're the ally because it's a two-way relationship. And it's a constant, ongoing relationship between, you know, how could I provide space for you? How could I advocate for the rights for you? And there's also this notion of passing the mic, you know, if there's an opportunity for a trans person to speak, give them the opportunity, you know, pass the mic, you know, and I think most importantly from the most basic level is that when we are saying that I'm a woman of transgender experience, this is who I am. You know, don't doubt that. Don't ask me to invalidate more about my experiences, you know, because that's another layer of dehumanizing my experience. I'm telling you my lived experience because this is my lived experience. So that's one thing I could say.
Okay, that's a good one. I hope you heard that, Meg, and to anyone who
Yes, thank you so much, Meg.
Let's see if we have one more question. And okay, here's one. How can countries continue to affirm and validate the trans lived experience?
Yeah, that's also a lot, you know. But also, I want to say that I'm, again, as someone born and raised in the Philippines, that offers this very complicated and, you know, nuanced experience where I grew up, and when it comes to immigration and policies, I think simply to advocate for rights of transgender people to be recognized. And I actually love this question now, because globally, especially when it comes to contexts, when we're talking about the global human rights, whether it's within the UN system or whether the US State Department system, when it comes to like global entities about human rights, when people talk about LGBT rights, they always coin this term about that more than 70 countries criminalize being gay, which is important. It's important to talk about that.
Yeah.
But what's always lost in the conversation is that trans people and gender non-conforming people, our rights are not even recognized. Meaning we don't exist. We can't participate politically as a person that we are. We can apply for jobs. We can access health. So all of it affects everything. So, again, it's a big question, but more so, I think validating the fullness of the humanity of trans people in the countries where it exists, in dignifying that reality of their recognition, them as a human being.
Absolutely. I think there's so many more, but I don't think we will be able to, because what usually happens is Instagram kicks us out after a while. So I don't want that to happen, because I want to save this live so that a lot of people who weren't able to watch it, like you said, it's like 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning in the Philippines, and I want people
actually,
to
it's fun
to watch.
It's fun you're saying that, because I know I mentioned something. If I could just make a quick shout out, because I know my trans mother is watching and some of my friends in the Philippines.
Sure.
I was looking at some pictures that I have here in my thing. I want to show you something because of our background in.
Sure.
This is one of my very first. I was 15 years old when I first started joining pageant. Is that so? My trans mother, Tiger Lily. This is my friends in the Philippines. This is my trans mom right here. Her name is Tiger Lily. These are some of the pictures when I joined the pageant. This is me right here.
You look fantastic. You have always been a beautiful queen. So this is nothing new to you. Oh my goodness. I love it. Body goals for days. You are body goals, you are face goals, you are intelligence goals, you are just everything. And thank you so much for joining me today. And before I let you go, do you have any final words that you want to say to people who are listening right now? Anything coming from your heart to them?
Sure. No, thank you. I want to speak to my trans community, my trans sisters and my trans brothers, and my trans community, especially in this moment in time where we're constantly bombarded, wherever you are in the world, about that we're not the person that we are. I want you to know that you are enough. I want you to know that you are the person that you're meant to be, especially trans women that's always been constantly being told that you are not a real woman. You as a woman of trans experience is just as valid and enough as a beautiful human being. I want to recognize the power in you, that in the moment when you're doubting about your own experiences, I want you to know that you are actually an enlightened being, that with your experience and your spiritual journey and becoming the beautiful person that you are, it's teaching the world, and keep shining that light, because you are powerful, you are beautiful, you are enough, and do not let anybody tell you that you are not valid. You are powerful. I love my trans community because they have given me so much love. So that's my message to them. And my message to the people that are watching, that are non-trans, that are allies, that are people that perhaps do not really understand fully the complexities of our journey. I want them to know that when we tell you that this is who we are, this is who we are. This is who we are. Recognize our humanity and our journey, because it's so powerful. As if you do more of your research and to understand, the journey that we've gone through, hope that it will teach you a lesson of hope and authenticity and power, because we're butterflies who have made the possibility to be who we are. So I want them to know that.
I don't want to cry now, because we're almost towards the end and you're making me want to cry. Geena, thank you so much for taking this moment. Thank you so much for coming to speak to everyone, because I'm sure people were looking forward to hearing it. it is continued voices that speak out even if they feel suffocated, that help people push through. It is your voice and every other voice that is so loud that will actually help, that one day we are able to recognize the rights of, you know, trans people, and to hear them and to know that they exist and they live amongst us and that they are human as much as we are. And most importantly, to listen to them when they say, I am a woman, I am a man, because that's who they are. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was enlightening for me as well, because I'm learning as I go. You know, I don't know much about the trans community, and I think this was so enlightening for me to be able to talk to you. It's always nice to have conversations and to learn and grow in them. So thank you so much for giving me that privilege and opportunity to be able to talk to you.
I want to say thank you to you for this space, and to hi to just be here as a sister to sister, as both of us that have, you know, have been empowered by beauty pageant and what that meant in our life. As I mentioned before, if not because of the trans pageant in the Philippines, I would not be here. And thank you for giving me this space, and thank you for just being here. So
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome. I will speak to you right after this for the resources and information to share with people on where young trans people can go get the help that they need. Thank you so much, Geena. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, my dear.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Thank you.
To everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. It was very enlightening for me. I'm sure it was helpful to some of you too. I think what we can take away from this is to know that we are all human first, and we need to recognize that the trans community needs their rights as much as we do. We need to practice more love, more tolerance, and understanding of people who are much different than we are. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will be posting this on the page for people who just got here and probably didn't see it. It was a very, very beautiful conversation we had with Geena. So please make sure to come back and watch it. You know, leave your comments and opinions, and I hope that we continue to grow and learn as human beings. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you next time on another live.